Hello, and welcome to the Road to Autonomy Podcast. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. The Road to Autonomy Podcast is brought to you in part by Florida Internet and Television. It's time to cut the tax on tech. Hello, and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Chef Hugo Bolanos on the podcast today. Welcome, Chef.
Hey, how are you, man? I was like, I can't believe we're finally doing this.
I can't believe we're here. I wish we were doing this in person over a wonderful meal and a bottle of wine, but we're here virtually due to the situation of the world because you have an incredible story to tell that a lot of individuals don't know, and it's a story that me as your friend, I'm proud of, and more individuals should learn from your story because what you've been through and what you've accomplished is phenomenal. You're merely just in the first inning of this incredible journey that we're going to discuss today.
No, listen, I appreciate you taking the time and even like wanting to even listen to the story. And you know, it's probably a lot like, I'm going to go ahead and call myself an outlier, but it's a lot like some of these outliers, like say it was, where it was like, you know, if I look back and if I put on 2020, it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like this tough adventure to get to where I needed to get to. But once you have it, once you put it down on paper and somebody asks you to write a bio, suddenly you're like, hey, you know what? That was pretty tough.
It was tough, but it's a story that, knowing you, has built grit. Because, Chef, you were born in Guatemala where cooking runs in your blood. Your father and grandfather ran a butcher shop in Guatemala City Central Market. What memories do you have from that butcher shop? Because it seems, you know, you're a very well-famous chef today. It seems like growing up in that environment laid the groundwork for you to become who you are today.
I can tell you that, and I know I joke about this, but it was definitely an aroma. And it's one you don't find here because we have those pesky things in America called regulations and health departments, you know. Whereas in Guatemala, you know, you had that familiar smell of dried blood that that you would get coming into a kitchen, or there might be a rooster hung upside down that your grandma was getting ready to prepare some kind of her Guatemalan version of coq au vin, you know. And it's I grew up with those kinds of things, like home cooking from the parents and the grandfather, and the meat on the table at always, you know, which is a luxury. You know, it was in your roots. I mean, my grandfather, he was known for being this tireless worker, and he had like 7 or 8 jobs, you know, all the time. The guy, you know, he needed to have income coming out of as many facets as possible. And then, you know, my dad, in the same way, you know, he was an accomplished math professor, you know, won great awards in Guatemala, and he was trying to get into the textile industry, and you know, he invested all of his money in this big, you know, like this big venture. And then unfortunately, through some corruption in the government and whatever, I was like, it didn't pan out the way he wanted. And then he took the last of his savings, and then, you know, he kind of just, you know, he took a shot, and he said, I'm taking my kids to where the promised land is, and where, you know, I want them to have a better future. And, you know, honestly, it paid off, thankfully, you know. And I think a lot of people like that, like myself, first generation, they kind of carry that sacrifice on their back, and they don't want it to go to waste. At least I do. And, you know, and I would hope that most of them kind of have that gratefulness, because I'm not gonna lie to you. It took my parents 20 years to get a citizenship. I'm talking about endless interviews and, you know, like work permits, this and that, and paperwork. And it was very expensive. And when I finally, you know, accomplished that, it was a great feat. And thankfully, I've been able to share that with my wife, who was also from Guatemala, you know, and then my daughter, who was born here. And then I already feel like my daughter already has the best head start, you know, that I can ask for her. So it's a good journey.
When you look back at that journey, so you have a daughter who was born here in America, but when you were 6, your parents, as you said, took that big risk to immigrate to America. What was that conversation like when your parents sat down with you and said, Hugo, we're going to America? I
think, because I recall, because it was actually about a week after my birthday party. So it was almost, for me, it was, I had the luxury of kind of like closing it out, I guess, as a 6-year-old could, as best, with like my friends. And it was kind of like, no, you know, honestly, I've always been, I don't generally like change, you know, especially growing up. I've adapted since then. But back then it was the end of the world. You give me a 6-year-old, you just had your party. You're a king of the mountain. And suddenly it's like, we got to go. Everything, you know, say goodbye. All of your family, all the people you know, you're going to go to another world. First time on a plane, first time in another country. And it's like, and it's suddenly it's like, what's going on here? And then this is all new. But I think my dad's timing was impeccable because, I mean, it was like the 1980s. I mean, it was booming. I mean, he kind of, I mean, I don't know. I imagine it kind of like going out west to kind of like strike for gold, and it was kind of like, make your way out to America, and in the 80s, and yeah, he was looking for gold, and that's what it was.
There's a lot of powerful stories throughout history of individuals that went to look for gold, either from a foreign country such as yourself or from individuals here in America. One of the most famous fathers was William Randolph Hearst's father, went out and found gold, and that's what enabled him to buy the San Francisco Chronicle, which eventually led to Hearst Publishing, was because the father took that risk, and your mother and father took an incredible risk when they moved to the United States and settled in Pasadena. And when you look at taking risks, you've taken a lot of risks throughout your career, and there's a really interesting one that I think started it all for you. When you were 17, you started working for free in a Japanese restaurant and with a gentleman that you affectionately called Mr. Miyagi, who didn't pay you in cash, no stipend or anything, and your pay was lessons. Can you talk about some of those lessons that you learned and what that meant to learn from this individual?
Because you think about that kind of story now, and it just sounds like so like, no, I mean, that's not the way it works, and I love talking about it because his name was Freddie Wasaki. He was a classically trained Japanese chef who had French roots also, incredibly skilled, more incredible golfer. And, sometimes I would caddy for him, which I thought was hilarious. But at the time, when I got to that restaurant, I'd already been kind of like a dishwasher, busboy. And then suddenly I was aiming for the fences when the restaurant opened up, this 17-year-old. And I was like, listen, I want to be a waiter at this restaurant. And then they're like, well, first of all, you're not 21. Okay. Second of all, you don't have any experience. Do you know Japanese eggplant? Do you know miso? Do you know any of this? Do you know what this French Beaujolais, whatever sauce is? And I was like, no, I don't know any of that stuff. I was like, but I'm gonna shoot for gold. I can prove it. And then the manager looks at me and he's like, listen, you look like a good kid. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna make you a runner instead of a busboy. I'll make you a runner. All right, if you can prove to me by a certain amount of time, we'll talk about it. Okay, how's that? And I was like, okay, fair enough. Okay, so the guy called my bluff. I still got my foot in the door, so for me it worked. All right, and then now I'm in the kitchen though. Now I'm in the kitchen with all the experienced runners, who are in the same position I was, trying to get ahead, trying to be waiters, whatever. And then now I'm thrown into this world where all I knew at the time was, maybe my Latin food, and California cuisine. But now you're throwing in Japanese and French and foie gras and miso eggplant, and stuff like that. And then suddenly I'm just like, I don't know any of these ingredients. I don't know any of these flavors. So I look at the chef and I was like, hey, listen, how can I come in and kind of like, at first it was kind of like, I had no intention of being in the kitchen. Because for me, it was like the front of the house. That's where it was. It was like, I wore a tie, and it's like I worked less hours, good money. It was cash. It was great. And then I look at the chef, and the chef, he saw right through me. I was like, chef, hey, listen, can I come in? Can you teach me some stuff about some of these ingredients? I was like, I have no time. All right. And I won't pay you anything. If you want to come in, I'll pay you in lessons. And you come in the morning, you clean the bathrooms, you clean the floors. And if you can hack it, at the end of the day, I'll teach you a lesson every single day. And we did that for the next 6 months. And at the time, I was high school, of course, working there. When I started there, it was in the summer. So it was fantastic because the timing was perfect. And again, it was all about timing, which I think is key. I was working there from 7 a.m. till 4:30. I would run to the local 24-hour fitness, get in the shower, okay, and then get out because I lived an hour away in Duarte, and this restaurant was in Pasadena. And then I would change into my suit and tie like Superman, and then I would start running. And I did that for like 6 months until 2 cooks didn't show up. And the chef looks at me and he's like, hey, take off that suit and tie, get this apron on. I need you on the line today. And then suddenly I was the cook. And then suddenly, it was like you got promoted from first mate on a pirate ship. And suddenly it was like, oh, you're part of the crew. All right. And then I did service. And it's funny because the cooks that were on the line that day are good friends of mine who by themselves, my friend Josh Brown, he heads up the entire culinary operation at the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore right now. My friend Ben Hong started his own catering company and used to do the Oscars and head up the Oscars with Wolfgang Puck. And it's crazy about how I think of it now, in that lineup in that kitchen in that moment in Pasadena, for me seemed like, like the biggest platform in the whole world. And then suddenly I was like transported into, now this could be a lifestyle in cooking. I didn't think about the money because the money was a third of what I was making, but the camaraderie and that craftsman kind of work that was with it. I think that one took me over the top. The restaurant, unfortunately, was too ahead of its time in Pasadena. It didn't work out. I mean, I guess foie gras and Beaujolais sauces just went over people's heads, so it just didn't work out. But that chef took me to a place next in Hollywood, Wolfgang Puck, at the Kodak Theater, the Oscars. Whereas me being this kid from Guatemala living in Pasadena, and my biggest dream at that time being 17, 18, I wanted to work at the Cheesecake Factory, which was hustling and bustling. And that's all I knew. In my head, I was like, okay, the Cheesecake Factory, it looks like the coolest place in the whole world. And I was like, this place is just starting. It's packed. And it's funny because I interviewed, after the restaurant closed, I had nothing on the horizon. I interviewed at Cheesecake Factory. I went to 6 interviews, a psychological test. I mean, it was a crazy amount of interviews for the Cheesecake Factory. And at the end, I met with the GM, and I didn't get the job. And I tell myself now all the time when I drive by Cheesecake Factory, if I would have gotten that job, it would have changed my whole life. It would have taken me down a different road. Suddenly, I get a call from Freddie Wasaki. Hey, I'm opening up with Wolfgang at the Oscars. Come help me out in the kitchen. I'll start you off as beginning cook. I was like, we'll keep this journey going. I said, why not? And then now I'm driving out to Hollywood. Never been out to Hollywood. I'm working where the Oscars are. I'm making John Goodman crab cakes. And he's like, and he's right there. And suddenly it's like you have these parallels, and then you get pushed into places where you never thought you would be. It's crazy.
Timing is becoming a trend during this conversation, and luck is also becoming a trend. If it wasn't for that opportunity that you had with the Mr. Miyagi gentleman to meet those other chefs, you would have never gotten the Oscars. If Cheesecake Factory came to their senses and hired you, you wouldn't be on the same career trajectory that you'd be. You'd more than likely be a corporate chef somewhere, probably bored out of your mind and not innovating. And when you're innovating, you're doing all this great stuff. You're at the Oscars and you're there with Wolfgang Puck. You're this kid from Guatemala, and now you're like, I'm at the Oscars. Did you have one of those like chills going down your spine, or is it like, oh, I better not mess this up? If I mess this up, I'm in deep doo-doo.
I can tell you that people always tell me, and they tell me, how aren't you nervous? How do you stay motivated? And I can tell you, I mean, it was, late 90s, early 2000s, and it was kind of a pirate show. I mean, I'm talking about, you were working with cooks that needed to stay awake, and they used everything and everything, if you know what I mean, to stay awake. And they looked at me, I was like, hey, Hugo, it's cool. Come over here, come to the bathroom with us. I was like, and then I'm just like sitting there, and I'm just like, guys, listen, I don't know why you even do that stuff. Honestly, I'm so scared to mess up. That's how I stay alert. I was like, I get here earlier, I stay here later because I feel like I got a monkey on my back because I wanted to go to culinary school. I looked at culinary schools, and my parents looked at me and was like, listen, I was like, there's 0 here, son. I'm sorry. I wish we had something for you, but there's no culinary school for it. And I was like, that's all it is. So I had to make it work. So I told myself then, against the wishes of my father, because my father, when he got here, he worked as a dishwasher, as a busboy, did front of house. And he worked his way up in the restaurants, became a sales rep for Rykoff, who would later be purchased by U.S. Food Service, one of the biggest food conglomerates in America. And he wanted his son to never go into the food industry, let alone the kitchen, culinary, which he knew was harder than anything. And I always felt like I had this monkey on my back. So I had to prove myself against these culinary grads, these kids, these French guys, these Japanese guys. And I'm over here, this outlier, this Central American who's just like, the only thing he's got going for him was one of the best things his parents ever gave him, which was the ability to speak both perfect English and Spanish, which he always, I never actually gave him enough credit for it. But the fact that I could be able to communicate and be that go-between between the chef and the cooks was so invaluable, and I think gave me such a head start that it was almost more valuable than a diploma. And it was crazy because I suddenly became the most useful tool in every kitchen I walked into.
You're right about the understanding fluent Spanish and fluent English. My dad was a produce broker, and he spoke fluent Spanish. And so he can go in and you all suddenly, you're getting the best produce for all these restaurants because you could understand the language. And you have to be bilingual today. Like we're working on our daughter to become fluent in Spanish. You have to understand that. And it's really important to point out to our listeners that you do not need a college education to change the world. You do not need a college education to go on to live your dreams. Like a chef said, you need hard work and dedication. And some of the largest companies are hiring now without college educations. Argo AI, the self-driving startup by Ford, you do not need a college education. Brian Selesky, who's the co-founder and CEO, says, if you got the drive and you got an interesting life experience, we want to talk to you. And that's how you're starting to see all these things emerge and evolve. And during this time when you're at catering, have you had some interesting experiences. And there's a really great one that I got to put you on the spot and talk to you about. You're driving the catering van to the late actor David Carradine's house.
Oh,
and you kind of backed up into Wolfgang Puck's brand new Mercedes. Are you thinking like it's all coming crashing down now?
I thought I had hit my peak, and honestly, I was like, it was good while it lasted. It was crazy because it was at that point I spent a few years in catering, and then suddenly, again, it was always about opportunity and timing, and then suddenly it's like, hey, Hugo, can you drive a catering van? And then I was like, God forbid, I barely learned to drive stick, I was like 3 years ago, in that time. And I was like, sure, of course, I'm your guy. I never said no to anything. I always volunteered for everything. And it was like I had to drive the catering van, this huge van. I did a catered event for David Carradine, the Kung Fu legend himself. Wolfgang was there, and I had to make sure I had to, do good for the boss. And they told me, you will have no help. It'll be just you and Wolfgang. It's only 10 people. It's just some cocktails. The front house take care of the champagne. And I was like, but this is the address. And again, now it's suddenly I'm in Hollywood, and now I'm being asked to drive a van that I don't know how to drive into Beverly Hills, which I've never been. And suddenly it's like, okay, and then you get pushed into these positions where it's like you need to go for it. There is fear, of course, but you got to get over your own fears to see what you're capable of. And then suddenly I do the party, I drive the van, I make it to the house. The party goes out wonderfully. Wolfgang is happy. He finally, he knows my name to an extent. He's just like, okay, you're Hugo, fantastic. And now I'm leaving. I'm feeling like, I was like, I'm the king of the world, top of the mountain, Beverly Hills. And now I'm backing out. And this is the era of the black Mercedes. Okay, this is pitch black midnight. I'm driving out, and then suddenly the valet guy's like, oh no, he's like, you hit the boss's car. And I'm just like, David Carradine, oh my God, Kung Fu. And then he's like, nah, you're boss, Wolfgang Puck. Oh my God. And then I go out, I crushed his door. Okay. It was this prototype Mercedes because Mercedes, German, he's Austrian, they were sponsoring him pretty much. It's like drive our newest cars, our prototypes, and whatever. And then suddenly I'm the guy that's got to go in there, interrupt him. He's got a glass of champagne. He's in a room with celebrities. And he's talking to David Carradine. I'm just like, hey, chef, can I talk to you? He's like, what is it? What is it? I got to show you something. He's like, what is it? I'm just like, I got in an accident. I was like, and then he's like, okay. So he comes out and he just starts laughing. And he's just like, he's like, chef, I'm so sorry, and then he's just laughing. I was like, I'm sorry. And he's just like, I'll tell you what, I'm just laughing because you hit my car with a van with my name on it. Don't worry about it, kid. Somebody will pay for it. As long as you're okay, just get out of here. All right. And then now fast forward the next day, by coincidence, again, timing, I had to be at the flagship restaurant, Spago, which was for us, it was like our Mount Olympus, the fine dining establishment, the flagship restaurant. And I had to go do this demo for Charlie Trotter, who was opening up a restaurant in Mexico, well, yada, yada. The press was going to be there. They needed help. So we're there. And I'm feeling like death because I just crashed his car. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm thinking my parents are going to get a call or something. I don't know, man. I'm just like, who knows what's going to happen? And then suddenly we do the event. Lee Hefter, one of my biggest influences in life, my mentor, comes in, and he didn't know me at the time. He kind of just knew of me, but he didn't know me. And then Wolfgang comes in. Now it's like, forget the champagne. He's sober as dead. Lee and him, they're in the kitchen of Spago. The exchange is, Hey, how's that party at David Carradine's? It was awful. Some stupid kid hit my car, my prototype Mercedes. Are you kidding me? And then Lee is like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm going to call Matt and catering. I'm going to find out who this kid is, and he's gone. And I'm just like sitting there, and I'm just like, suddenly I put my head on, and I'm just like, hopefully he won't even notice me. Oh my God. I'm not even going to stand up. I'm not going to raise my hand, whatever. Anyway, we get to the demo, and suddenly Wolfgang is making the rounds as he always does. You know, he's like a master of quality control, and he's tasting everything, looking at everything, saying hi to everyone. And suddenly he gives me a second look, and he does a double take, and that's it. You're the kid. You're that stupid kid who hit my car. And then he's like, yeah. And then Lee's like, hey Lee, this is the guy, this is the kid. And then Lee looks at me, he's like, you had the balls to come in here after you hit Wolfgang's car? I was like, all right. I was like, we're gonna take care of this right now. Okay, you're transferring from catering to Spago. All right, and you're gonna start paying for this. And then honestly, 10 years later, I mean, it's history. I mean, it was the best school I've ever could have asked for in my whole life. You know, best experience.
It was all about timing, and it was about having cojones to be honest. And that's the thing that we try and instill in our children, is to be honest and accept responsibility. You could have went and hid in the vehicle or drove off or never showed up to Spago that day, but you owned it. And look at the incredible reward that you had, you to this day. And I've seen you and Wolf interact and cook together, and from my perspective, there's a trusted relationship there, and you took it head on to say, okay, Wolf, we're going to be honest. You guys have been all over the world together. You've been down in Uruguay with Francis Mallman, which we're going to chat about in a bit, because there's a great story there. You ended up at Spago, and the flagship of flagships, and having eaten there, and knowing a lot of the people on the team, understanding the seating chart and the hierarchy. You've seen a lot. You dealt with a lot. What would you say some of your most memorable memories are from that incredible run at Spago, working your way all the way from Lime Chef to number 3?
Yeah, to number 3. I was the kitchen manager, and I was in charge of everything. I was managing $8 million in purchases. I was helping balance out a $16 million a year restaurant, fine dining. You know, one of the highest grossing restaurants in the West Coast, and celebrity filled. I mean, we would do buyouts during the Emmys, during the Oscars. I mean, forget it. I mean, suddenly I was this kid who didn't go to culinary school, who was prepping 3 nights of buyouts for HBO, and I had to coordinate renting refrigerated trucks to cook 1,000 lobsters. And that we didn't have no refrigeration, so we're cooking in the kitchen, rolling it out to the refrigerated truck. I got to make sure the truck has enough gas to go all night and stay cold. And I'm just like, and suddenly it's like, I mean, you get put in these places where, I'm not gonna lie to you, I mean, I had many nights sleeping over bags of linen, because I didn't want to go home, because I was like, you know what, it's not worth it. Let me just stay here and make sure everything is done. It was incredible responsibility. It was an incredible learning curve. I tell myself all the time that I'll never have a harder job in my whole life than that job as kitchen manager at Spago, managing, all that quality. And during that time, it paid off, not just because I was learning, but because I was pushing them to learn. We had our own chef series that Wolfgang would do with the Meals on Wheels, and that him and Barbara did, which is amazing work at charity. Every time the chef would come in, whether it was from New York or Danielle Boulud would come in, and him and Lee and Wolfgang would just get along. And I would say, hey, chef, listen, thank you for the opportunity to work in the dinner. I'm glad it worked out. Can I go work in New York? It became this conversation piece, and it became kind of like the go-to summer trend that Hugo tries to quit to go work for all these chefs. And it became like a yearly tradition. And eventually it was like, okay, listen, I don't do this for anybody, but I'm going to call Danielle. You're going to work in New York for the summer. All right. And then you're going to come back. All right. And then it little by little, I went to New York, spent time with Danielle, worked in the kitchen. And at the end of the summer, Danielle treats me to dinner at his flagship restaurant. And he sits down and he's like, you're Lee and Wolfgang's guy. Listen, you can go back if you want, but if you want a job, you can have a job here. Okay. And again, choices, timing, appreciation. I went back to LA. The next year, Alain Ducasse, France. And then suddenly that one he made me work for. That one I had to get, international insurance. I had to learn French, and then suddenly, again, never been out of America at that point. I've only been, only from Guatemala. First time in France by myself, 2006. and now I'm in Paris, and it's like all by myself, and now I'm working at one of the greatest restaurants in the whole world, and for the greatest chef. And you spend a summer there, and then you deal with these French guys who, again, thankfully Spanish and French are very similar, so my French was pretty good. And again, nobody had pushed Wolfgang and Lee to do that, and nobody had threatened them and said, this or nothing, or I'll figure it out on my own. And I made it happen. I paid my own way, and I came back, and then they gave me higher positions and they gave me more responsibility. But it was all a matter of that. It was timing and pushing them, and you can't do that anymore. You can't just go work for free in France. Forget it. And that doesn't happen anymore. And it was timing, and I was able to do that and take advantage of that. 10 years later, it was like I had this like cornucopia of experiences that made me who I am.
Was the Alain Ducasse, was that the one at the Plaza Athénée?
Plaza Athénée, yeah.
And so you're dealing with that environment, and I haven't eaten there, but I've eaten at Danielle in New York several times, and so completely two different environments, two different cultures. As a chef coming from Guatemala, how would you compare the different cultures from both from the back of the house and the front of the house to the Danielle in New York as compared to the Alain Ducasse in France?
I think that's interesting because it's like they have a mental fortitude, I think, in New York, and they have a culture for appreciating fine dining, much better than hopefully, that I hope will improve here in LA. But in New York, it's at another level. And then you go to France, it's on another level. And I eventually got my way to Tokyo later on. But when I got to Japan, I asked them in Japan, actually, you know what? I said, in America, they say the guest is always right. And then in France, they say the guest is always wrong. I was like, what do you guys say here in Japan? And then the guy looked at me, and this is like a 2-star Michelin sushi restaurant. And he's like, well, that's easy. Here in Japan, we say the guest is God. And I was like blown away because I was like, man, all these cultures and the way they look at food and the interaction and their passion for food and service and quality. And it's shaped me, I was, taking these adventures, pushing myself to go to these places in the corners of the world to see the different perspectives, and it's shaped me in my mindset. I'm just like, I'm a big believer in that you cannot cook great food or give a great experience unless you've received that great food, received that great experience, and seen that for yourself.
You're 110% correct. It's about the experience, and you did one heck of a bang-up job, and we used to love going every year, was when you did the summer barbecue at the Bel-Air. Was that taking all of your global travels and bringing all of your favorite chef friends or chefs that you admired together to come to the Hotel Bel-Air on the lawn to have this incredible barbecue? Because those nights were awesome. I mean, you've got Francis Mallman with the rack, and then you got this guy with the cave. Then you got I remember did the whole roasted pig over here, and then you got the caviar over there. But to me, that was like, wow, this is an experience that's done right. Was it, and all the different flavors from around the world? Was this Hugo in a nutshell?
It was, and I'll tell you why. Because here I was a chef at the Hotel Bel-Air, and top hotel in the world, great company with Dorchester, Wolfgang Puck. But now I was in a position where it wasn't kind of like guaranteed guest count. At Spago, easy, flagship 300 covers. At Cut, the steakhouse where I was the chef, again, a great steakhouse in LA. People knew what they were going for. Now I was at this hotel. That was amazing. It had amazing everything. But I needed to create awareness for it because Wolfgang, unfortunately, had pigeonholed himself into, he saturated the fine dining market. He was soaking up every nutshell of his own market. So I had to compete against my own upbringing, my own Spago, my own Cut, my own restaurants that I loved. And now I had to be Hugo at Wolfgang Puck at Hotel Bel-Air, and I had to create for myself because nobody's gonna do it for me. So then it suddenly became into a place where I stopped asking for permission, and I started working on this idea. And I looked around the Bel-Air and I looked at the assets, and you've been there, you stayed there. I mean, it's one of the most unique hotels in LA. It's like outdoor and indoors all in one. And I look at all these yards. I'm looking around and I'm just like thinking about the trends of what's next and this and that. And suddenly I hear about this Netflix series coming out, and I look about this chef from Argentina. And then every day in a hotel, anybody will tell you this, any chef, they go through the daily who's coming in, who's the who and who. And you see this name come up, Francis Mallman, friend of a friend, chef in Argentina. And I'm just like, wait a minute. This is it. This is my timing. I got the assets. This is the guy. Okay. I have the cachet brand with Wolfgang Puck. Okay. I can sell him on that. He comes in for brunch. I wine him and dine him. And I speak Spanish again. Okay. And we have a shared, it's a like-minded setting. And we have this amazing brunch. And I tell him, listen, what do you think about coming down here and, cooking some fires with me? I'll get a local legend like Adam Perry Lane to come out too. I'll sell him on the cachet of Bel-Air. And then he's like, great, let's make it happen. Well, I can, and then this is the thing. I wanted it in the summer. I wanted it in barbecue season in America. I wanted it in May. That didn't work for a moment. And then he's like, I want to do it in September. And now I'm just kind of like, okay, what the hell am I going to do? September? Who was going to come up barbecue in September? So then I figured, I look at the calendar. I'm just like, all right, you know what? We're going to call it the end of summer barbecue. And suddenly I figure out a price ticket. I figure out the room situation for the chefs. I eventually presented to the GM, which she was pretty much honestly on her way out, finishing up a great run at Bel-Air. And it's funny though, because I make fun of her now. She's a great friend, Denise Flanders. And I tell her, I was like, because her last words to Ed Mady were, Hugo wants to do a barbecue on the front lawn. I do not agree with him. I recommend you don't let him do it. And now I had to convince the regional that there was cachet in this. I gave him my ROI. Okay. I told him there's cachet in this. I'm just trying to make the place busy. He says yes. So now things are lining up. Wolfgang suddenly perks up and he's like, who's coming? Francis who? And I'm just like, because it was my job to keep him relevant. It was my job to tell him who's trending, who's that, And he's like, okay, fine. What day is it? I'll be there. It's a Wednesday. Put it on my calendar. I'll be there. I'm just like, fine. And suddenly, we're selling tickets. I'm just like, who's going to show up to this thing? Is anybody going to show up to this thing? I'm doing a barbecue for $175. I mean, oh my God. It's like, who knows? This is before, anybody was doing anything outdoors, events like this, like a barbecue of this type. And then suddenly it became the talk of the town. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel showed up. I mean, Jay-Z showed up. I mean, I don't know. It was like like-minded individuals getting together in this amazing setting in Bel-Air. And then 5 years later, I mean, it just kept growing and growing to the best chefs around the world. It turned into a fine dining series with Pierre Gagné from France, Massimo Bottura from Italy. It became the thing to do to get cred in wood-fired cooking, outdoor cooking. You mentioned the whole pig, the whole cow. That was Dave Frank from Singapore, who now has his own barbecue restaurant at the Waldorf in Fiji. I mean, it's like, it became a venue for like something amazing. And again, it was because I took a risk. I sold the chefs on the cachet of this, and I promised them that. And I probably couldn't make do on that promise, honestly. But I sold them on the dream, and I made it happen. And because I had to, and because it was one of those things. You just had to do it. And the second I stopped asking for permission, and it was true. I mean, that's how it all really came together.
The staff at the Bel-Air created this artificial sense of scarcity. I remember we're coming in for brunch one day on our way to the pool, and the barbecue's going to sell out. Don't worry, we got you on the list. No, it's going to sell out. And like every time there was all the scarcity, and I remember I was so proud of you because we saw you like the day or two before when you're setting this whole thing up, and I saw Francis's thing, and I'm like, okay, he's going to do this, and then. We arrive, and we were regulars there, and I see the ringleader himself. There's P.T. Barnum out front, Wolf happier, the biggest grin on his face, so happy, greeting people. And you get in there, and I was like, okay, you did it, and you just had this you had this incredible, and Gabby will tell you the same thing, this look of joy and happiness. But I could tell you're like, I did it, and you not only did it that first year, you did it for the remaining 4 years after that. You had an incredible run. You learned a lot. I remember the contraption you made for the cow and all that stuff that had to be built the day before. And then, the Home Depot tools to build this thing. And
yeah. Honestly, you'll never learn faster than when a chef from Singapore asks you for a whole cow, and then he says, "Listen, I need a spit to cook this cow on." I was like, okay, are you going to send me specs? Listen, I'll show up. I want an SUV to pick me up. And I'm just like, no. Listen, I need the specs on this fit. Again, an SUV, I'm bringing this much crew. I was like, you're not listening to me. We're not talking to each other. And then suddenly it's like, okay, he doesn't care. I got to figure this out. I got to call in a welder. I got to do the math on the weight of a cow to the gauge of the steel. And I'm just like, okay. And, again, you're put into positions where you have to sink or swim and trial by fire, all that good stuff. And I could have ran away. I could have said, listen, this isn't working out. And I could have thrown my hands up and, it would have been a big disaster. But there's a point where I like to say it's that point of no return, and you have to commit to it. And that's just it. There's no going back. It's like you got to figure it out. And you got to go find a 24-hour open Home Depot and just make it work.
When you look at no going back, you and your brother are getting ready to open a restaurant. The pandemic hits, the investor money in the restaurant business dries up. But following your roots, you didn't panic. You innovated. And you said, okay, guess what? We're going to open a takeout business, and we're going to do it as a pop-up.
Yeah.
What was that emotional journey like? Because you're on the cusp of another great time. Because as we've heard on this podcast, you have an incredible sense to time things. So what was that emotional journey to get to the point where you are in takeout before we get to where I think you're going next?
It's again, yeah, you're right. It's the difference between being afraid but not being too afraid. Because you always be afraid of anything that's new, and most people are. But you have to ask yourself whether you are too afraid to either make that jump or afraid enough just to make it and then just kind of go with the flow. And I decided to leave Bel-Air. I had an opportunity to work on my own restaurant, the dream coming together with my brother who I got a job at Spago, and he worked his way up the wine ladder in the front of house industry to have a great reputation, become an advanced, almost a master. And suddenly we're in this position where that street cred that you built up your whole life is amounting to things. And then suddenly people are telling you that, they'll give you this, they'll give you that. I love the idea. I love the food. And you guys got the cred. Here it is. And then suddenly it's all coming together again. And you feel like, okay, this is, lucky timing, whatever you want to call it. And suddenly it gets taken away from you with a world-changing pandemic, a once-in-a-lifetime event. And then I could have actually just kind of packed it up. And believe me, I had opportunities to go run a hotel for somebody else, or, go work in a restaurant again for somebody else. And it's funny because you read these books of like Buffett, and then he likes to say that people don't take enough advantage of the ability to say no for yourself. And suddenly it was, you had the opportunities because you had to you had to put that aside because the restaurant dried up. And then people want you to go work for them and go make them money. And then I said, no, let me see what I can do. Let me see what I can pivot to. And I used my clients at Bel-Air and Beverly Hills. I started personal chefing on the side, but I still had that. I still had the trademark. I still had the logo. I still had the vision. And then I said, listen, it's tough to eat in a restaurant and feel safe. Let's see if we can create this experience at home. Let's see if we can create this in a takeaway. I came up with a hashtag that it's still, nobody ever used. It's called Ritzy Delicious. I had just finished reading this book on Cesar Ritz and how he changed the market in Paris with his Ritz hotels and how he started that brand. And it kept sticking with me, the word Ritzy. I was like, you don't hear that word too much anymore. Ritzy. And then I kept telling myself, because I knew I wanted to be able to pay for quality ingredients, and I wanted to be able to people to pay me and charge for quality ingredients. And then nowadays, you see my Instagram, I've been kind of building it up, and then I'm telling myself, okay, how can I take advantage of this market, the hashtag? And then suddenly I thought about the concept and Ritzy Delicious, and I was like, okay, all right, this is turning into something. It's formulating in my mind. And then my wife, who kept pushing me, kept saying, listen, if you don't do this, nobody's going to do it for you. I was like, you should just do it and just try it out, see what happens. Who cares? Get some to-go containers, and then suddenly I order a stamp with the logo. I create the logo. I order stickers. I created a web page with my brother, who's a fantastic systems operator that he works on all of our logistics. And suddenly you're putting together a purpose statement and about, and then the product is coming together. And all this thing sounds like, it's like it took months in advance. No, I put this all together in like 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, I had the vision, but this all took 2 or 3 weeks. This is like 2 days of working on a logo. And I would tell people that, just one day at a time, just take a day at a time, a purpose at a time, but be productive. I saw a need and, I wanted to really try and take advantage of it. And it's working out so far.
You're clearly taking advantage of it. You had that incredible write-up in Eater, and I read it and it put a giant smile on my face. That thing was like, wow, okay, here's Schefter in the middle of a pandemic pivoting to a takeout-only pop-up. I have to ask you, so if I'm going to your takeout pop-up, how's the packaging? How are you keeping the food at the presentation the way that you want it so the food doesn't get mushy or doesn't get dry? Because to me, that seems like that's one of the biggest hurdles that has to be overcome when you have takeout or delivery. Any thoughts on packaging?
Great. Yeah, no, I'm still looking at cloud kitchens, and I think that is going to be part of the way of the world and in the next kind of like food industry. If you want to try innovative cooking, I mean, you'll always have those standouts. You'll always have the McDonald's and this and that and whatnot. I was like, but if you want to get a more elevated version of that, that's kind of world I want to get into. So people will pay a little more top dollar for it. Okay. Appreciate, prime meats, vintage Galician style meats, great seafood from Europe and here local in Santa Barbara, prepared perfectly. And it started with something as basic as this. I wanted to do something as simple as a sandwich that I could charge, a decent sandwich for it with great quality ingredients. But I told myself, I really hate it when French fries come and they get cold and they're soggy. So then I said, listen, I was like, well, I can't really do French fries and expect them to be hot. I'm a chef. I got to be realistic. So then I told myself, well, I'm Guatemalan. I was like, Latin cuisine, tortillas. And then I was thinking about this region of the world and Basque cooking and southern France, northern Spain. And they do this potato tortilla, the tortilla de patatas. And suddenly I'm just in my head, I was like, listen, I can make this tortilla and it doesn't have to come hot. And that's going to be my French fry. And then suddenly I was like, you know what? Nobody's doing this. I looked around. I was like, nobody's doing this potato tortilla. And suddenly I was like, okay, I'm not going to do French fries. I'm not going to do chips. I'm going to do this. Nobody else is doing it. And I saw the opportunity and I was like, great. It became our biggest seller. People get it, a whole tortilla to themselves. They love it with the sandwich. They love it by itself. They suddenly get nostalgic over it and they're like, oh my God, I haven't had this since I was in Europe. I haven't had this since I was in Spain. And then suddenly you touch on a market that nobody does, that nobody's done, and everybody does French fries. It's like, okay, this is different. Okay. Again, it's like one thing builds on another. It's something as simple as an idea builds on a tortilla. Tortilla builds on, word of mouth, and word of mouth goes on to an Eater article, and then that goes into pop-ups, and suddenly I told you about this. Suddenly you start getting calls from investors, and you have millionaires who are like, listen, there's a market for this. I want to back you. And then suddenly you're like, oh wow, I guess this is how it happens. It's like building by building. It's like.
You're getting the phone calls from investors. We're on the cusp of the whole cloud kitchen, dark kitchen revolution. So why don't you put on the Ritz, get the Ritzy Delicious hashtag going, and do a really high-end delivery business with incredible packaging for Búho Rouge, where I can order my meal. You have one of your employees come dressed very nicely. You set my table. Your brother, for the record, who is a great wine somm, has picked out some incredible bottles of dinners we've had. Have him pair it. That's an incredible experience because cloud kitchens are great, but you're missing that experience. And from when you cooked us some of the incredible meals at the Bel-Air and that experience of the being in that room and that atmosphere, that's what you're missing. But you can make this great food. So is that next for Búho Rouge that you become the world's first ritzy delivery service? Because from the business economic standpoint, you can make some healthy margins. You're not competing on price. You're competing on experience and the quality of your food, which I know that you can do, and you can do because you've got that drive and you've got that passion.
Yeah. I think I'm looking for whatever that next platform is, because I think the old world of looking as a chef as a success of a restaurant, 10% margins or whatever that was in the old days. I think looking at this post kind of COVID world, you have to kind of be alongside what you're saying about, and it's all about the network and it's all about the connections and work, whether you can deliver on that experience and to create that experience. I'll tell you what, because we talked about this, I see chefs in France who are trying to do their Michelin cuisine and they're doing videos for the guests to pay top dollar, but to give them all the ingredients delivered and then they have to put it together. And I'm just like, how can you expect people to pay that much money for them to build it for themselves? And you're making a video for them to put it together? No. I was like, it's like you say, you need to have that experience there at home. You need to have a trained person that can give you that hospitality experience at home. And I like the idea of the cloud kitchens, and I think that I think that is going to be a big way in the future. But it's a lot like you said. If I can be that guy that can be Ritzy delivered, Ritzy autonomous, Ritzy experience, whatever it might be, but I can have it easy for you, at home. Because honestly, I don't want to compete with Chipotle. Or something. I don't. I want to work in a world of that, like-minded individuals in these places like we talk about, Palm Beach, the Hamptons, it's like Aspen, Malibu, people that appreciate better quality ingredients and that overall experience paired with that amazing wine, because people are always going to appreciate that. But I want to be part of that market with better margins, appreciated technique, quality ingredients.
You want to compete with Chipotle because they make a lot of money. So on that front, you want to compete, not necessarily similar product. But you and I have talked a lot about this, that there's riches and niches. So I would propose to you do the Búho Rouge. You have your luxury delivery service, and you can get a pretty healthy margin on that. And then perhaps you have Búho Rouge Express, where you partner with like a delivery bot service such as Nuro or Service DoorDash or Uber Eats, and you deliver those beautiful sandwiches that you can package in the right sort of tin foil or the right packaging, and you can run them autonomously. Now you've got two revenue streams. You're going into a business, and you don't have the overhead of having to launch a restaurant and pay for all of that. So when are you going to launch this? And hopefully you're going to bring it to the East Coast.
Oh man, honestly, it's on your words. Obviously, we're all waiting for this whole thing to kind of quiet down and the vaccine to come out, and then and we're trying to get our timing right. I'm looking to do this hopefully by second or third quarter 2021. And right now I'm looking at the cloud kitchens. I'm working with them to try and kind of promote the brand and work within the tricky thing about the cloud kitchens for sure. And the one thing that Chipotle does benefit in, if we're talking about Chipotle, is because they have all of the standalone locations, kind of like Starbucks does, all throughout. So they can deliver all throughout. The limitation of the cloud kitchens is that sometimes they're in parts of, they're in certain areas of their demographics where that checkout was just for you isn't be there. I mean, nobody's going to want that Roots experience in Garden Grove, and it's and they just don't want that. And their cloud kitchen, the only one they have available might be next to the Coliseum, where they in a year or two, they told me that they're getting into Santa Monica, they're getting into Brentwood. Okay, all right. So when they're knocking on those doors, I want to be there. But you also have to take that into account. And that's why I think standalones, there is still a market for them, as long as you don't make them too big. I think the model of a 6,000 square foot restaurant with 300 seats, I think the margins are so narrow there that, Chipotle's got it down where they do a 2,000 square foot location and they can do delivery apps. They can do, takeaway and they have it there for pickup. It doesn't need to be this gigantic space. It doesn't need to do that.
You bring up the valid point. So you get a 1,000 square foot restaurant, a 2,000 square foot restaurant, and then you build out a larger kitchen. Perhaps you have your kitchen to serve your dining guests, then you have your delivery takeout, because the food, when you deliver it, if I'm going to spend $400, $500 for delivery, you want the food to be hot. You want it to be prepared right. There's all these things to go into it, because one bad experience, that person talks to this person, that person talks to this person, it's over. So are we going to see kitchens completely redesigned then to kind of get the food closer to these individuals, where the data says that the majority of these customers order a high ticket item?
Oh no, I agree that it's definitely heading that way. I read about a hotel in Dubai that wants to build a small kitchen on every floor of its hotel, because the one, this is an example of, I think, the way it needs to be, so that the guests can have that experience closer to where they wanted to have. But this hotel in Dubai, who is going to build a small kitchen on every level of its hotel, so that they can provide crispy hot French fries on order. And I thought in my head, I was like, you know what? Anybody else would think, okay, that's silly. No, you do one kitchen down at the bottom. And I look at them just like, wow, that is genius. Because everybody, even though they know their french fries are going to be cold, they still get it for some reason in the hopes and dreams that it's going to come in hot. And then you have this one hotel on every floor, they're going to build these crispy hot french fries. And that's genius. You make the sandwich and then you deliver the french fries hot. Boom. I mean, it's like, of course. I mean, they're looking at a need and they're fulfilling that need. And I think it's going to go like that with the cloud kitchens. They're going to try and get that curated cuisine for anybody and everybody. And I want to, we always talk about timing. We're talking about timing in this podcast, but I want to be a part of that roaring 20s post-COVID where, okay, unfortunately, some of my brothers and sisters in restaurants who have been trying to kind of fight the good fight are going to be seeing, like, okay, that light of like, okay, this old model doesn't work anymore. What are we going to pivot to? I want to be there where that is coming down and the next wave is coming up, because I don't want to be a part of the success in the old model. I want to be a part of success in the new model. Oh, how that's going to go.
And that's a really great way to wrap up this podcast, because you're right about timing. You will be ahead of there. You will figure out what is the future of delivery. You will figure out, will it be autonomous delivery? Will it be a luxury service? Am I going to have to do a refrigerated truck to get it there? Will I have to have certain insulation inside of this truck? Are we going to have certain shocks or different ways? Is it better putting in an electric vehicle versus a gas vehicle because of the damage to the food? You're going to figure those things out, because I know that you're on to something great. And Chef, as we look to wrap up this wonderful conversation, I'd like to ask you, what would you like the listeners to take away with them from this conversation?
I would say that it is very easy to talk yourself out of your own dreams. And it's only you looking in the mirror every day that's really going to make it happen for yourself. And you should stop asking for permission to be successful. And there's so much that goes along with that people take for granted, the ability to just try. And I'm talking about the basic word of just trying, to just question, how can I do this? Don't make excuses for yourself. Honestly, I started with something as basic as the name and the logo. And I tell myself, and you do this. You think about Apple and you think about the logo, the apple with the bite or whatever. And I spent some time thinking, okay, what do I want? I'd love a restaurant, but then suddenly I'd outgrown myself and I said, no, I wanted a brand. I didn't want a restaurant. I wanted a brand. So how could I make something that wasn't as simple as Hugo's Tacos or Hugo's Restaurant or something? Okay, how can I make something that can have cachet in the airport in Dubai and, in the airport in Dublin or whatever? And I was like, okay, how can I make something that has wide-ranging cachet, can have instant notification, and hopefully I got it right, but I'm sure it'll evolve. But I would say start something with as basic as just that basic point. Okay, how you want to start, and then work on that. And then work on something else, and then work on something else. But if you don't even try, and if you start building that dream for somebody else, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure you can do that, but just don't be in a position where you're constantly going to be questioning yourself. Oh man, I should have done this. I should have done that. Because that's an empty hole that you'll never fill. It's just empty. So
that's a beautiful piece of advice, and thank you for talking about brands, because the power of brands in society are second to none, and the power of brands are only going to grow. And as to support your family, your brand will eventually, when you retire, your brand will become a royalty check that will continue to support your family and pay for your daughter's education. And you're building a really great brand. You had a great mentor in Wolfgang Puck, which is a world-renowned brand. And for the Búho Rouge brand, where can our listeners go if they're in the LA area and they want to go to your pop-up? Where can they go, or if they wanted to learn more about your endeavors?
Yeah, well, right now, honestly, they can get. I do constant info on our Instagram with Búho Rouge. We have a website that has all the info of our pop-ups and our next ones. We're planning on an amazing one with Nancy Silverton at Keys Paca on the 30th of November after Thanksgiving. But unfortunately, they got, as it got put on hold with the restrictions, how they may come. But we're going to keep at it, and we're going to keep pairing with some of the best chefs doing these pop-ups and bringing that experience to you. And hopefully, I can make my way down to Palm Beach and create Búho, for those great like-minded individuals, in your neighborhood. And hopefully I can bring that to you.
Well, we'd love to host you for a Búho Rouge pop-up in Palm Beach. And the future's bright, the future's autonomous, and the future is timing. Chef Hugo, thank you so much for sharing your incredible inspirational story, and something tells me, sir, you're going to be ahead of that next trend because you've got a talent and you got a gift. Thank you.
Thank you, Grayson.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.